She went from depression to helping people live an most awesome and joy-filled life. What?
Welcome to the Joyous Expansion Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Dupree, scouring the globe to bring you stories of courage, passion, and resilience. If I could sum up this podcast into one word, I would use empathy. Now let's get inspired.
Welcome to the Joyous Expansion Podcast. I am your host once again, Brett Dupree, here with a very interesting conversation with Myhriah Young, who went through some childhood trauma and depression and finally turned her life around to help people live an awesome and joy-filled life, just like I do. But first is the part of the Joyous Expansion Podcast where I talk about myself, because if I can't be vulnerable, how can I expect my guests to be? Technically not that long since my last podcast. Today is a Wednesday. Last time I put one out was Sunday, so can't talk really what happened in the last 3 days, but this is March 4th. And we are going through something. I live in the Seattle area, and the fear has gripped my community because the coronavirus is taking over. Everybody is buying out all the Perel and other hand sanitizer in all the stores. And for some reason, all the toilet paper and bottled water. It's apparently we're getting ready for an earthquake or something, and diarrhea. I don't know. I don't understand the run on toilet paper. I don't understand. Well, I can understand the run on surgical masks, even though you're not really supposed to buy them. But the run on toilet paper and the run on bottled water really confuse me. So I'm going to talk about the coronavirus for a second. I feel the coronavirus has done two things that has shown in our life right now. Basically, number one, we have the side of people who are freaking out, the fact that we've had now 10 deaths of the coronavirus in the Seattle area at this point in time. And the coronavirus, if you just read the literature, is decently scary. I mean, it's basically the flu, which is highly contagious. You can have the coronavirus for about a week or two without showing any symptoms and then start showing symptoms, which means you have a week or so of being contagious without showing anything, which means that if you have the coronavirus and you go out and you don't know it, you could spread it to other people without even knowing that you're contagious. And that makes this a decently contagious disease. The other thing is, as of right now, what we know about the virus is that it has a 3% death rate at this point, which is decently high for this highly contagious pathogen, which of course have people completely freaking out. And there's something to completely freaking out. I mean, we should be worried. We should be paying attention, because a highly contagious with that high of a death rate can cause some damage and kill a lot of people, especially the people who are most vulnerable. People with immune deficiency, people with diabetes, people with heart problems, and the elderly, who a lot of times have heart problems and diabetes. These are people who can really increase their chance of death with this but more deadly disease. This is basically kind of like the flu, but 10 to 150 to maybe even 200 times more deadly. But at the same time, you also don't want to freak out about it. As this is the flu, we know how to do our best to prevent it. If you do feel sick, stay at home, which is a kind of a problem in the United States because a lot of people work hourly, sick leave, and basically they're one missed paycheck away from homelessness. But we know that's a fact. And those are the people who get sick are the ones who should wear the surgical masks, as that can help prevent the spread. It doesn't really help for people who without it to wear surgical masks, which is causing the problem because people are freaking out. It's hard to get toilet paper right now because people for some reason are stocking up on toilet paper, even though it's not an earthquake. It's not a tornado. It's not snowing. It shouldn't be a run on toilet paper. One of the symptoms isn't extreme diarrhea. People are completely freaking out, and also probably causing a nocebo effect of people thinking that they might have it, and then they're jamming up the health system or going to the doctor when they obviously do not need to because they're freaking out. This is scary. It's all over the news. It's all over everything, which is one of the things. It's our fear response taking over. But there is also something almost just as insidious is the backlash to the fear response. People who are trying to downplay this by saying it's not more deadly than the flu and that we survived so many things in the past and we're probably going to survive this one, which is a downplay because, number one, the reason why we survived SARS, Ebola, and all the other ones, well, we would survive them anyway. Well, maybe not Ebola if that one really got out of hand. That one had a really high death rate. But one of the things about it is the fact that we did kind of freak out, and that allowed us to do a good job of containing them and minimizing their impact. So the freak out is somewhat warranted, especially to the vulnerable parts of our society. And completely discounting the virus as if it is nothing, which it is not. I mean, this is something that if spreads like the flu the flu kills 60,000 or so people a year. It's a pretty decent size killer, but it would kill 600,000 instead to maybe 1 million people if it spread like the flu, which is a lot more. And that's a lot of dead people, especially the elderly. So there is no need to do a complete opposite backlash. It's about being in the middle, keeping yourself informed, paying attention to... One thing about the media is you have to recognize that they sell emotion. While it's a good idea to find a way to keep yourself informed. You want to know. You don't want to completely discount it. You don't want to law of attraction it and ignore it. This is one of the reasons why I don't like the law of attraction, because it causes people to ignore actual issues. You want to take a pragmatic approach, look at the data available and make the decisions based on the data available. All the scientists are saying the same thing. Wash your hands for 20 seconds periodically. Do your best not to touch your face. One thing I've noticed, it's really hard not to touch your face. I touch my face all the freaking time. You know how many times my nose itches? It's ridiculous. Do your best to not touch people and avoid contact especially if people are sick. Don't go to crowded places, or best to avoid them as much as possible. Basic things that we know what to do. I mean, nowhere did they say stock up on surgical masks. In fact, they're telling you to do the opposite. No way they say buy all the Purell. They're telling you just wash your hands with soap and you'll be fine. Especially if you're healthy. If you're a healthy individual, there's no need to overly freak out. But again, if you are someone with one of those immune problems, or if you have kids, it's something to pay attention to, even though this one does not seem to be a problem with children, which is nice. I mean, I'm not saying hooray, just the elderly are dying, but I'm saying more along the lines of it's good that it's not really hitting children. I mean, people like to, if you mention the Spanish flu or the flu of 1918, and the really weird thing about that flu is that it did an amazing job of killing people between the ages of 20 and 25. One theory is that during that age, your immune system is the strongest, and something interesting about that flu is the way your body fights the flu. Since your immune system was so good at it and it just did it a little too hard, it would flood your lungs with fluid and you end up drowning on fluid from the immune defense. It was a scary time, but at the same time, most people didn't die. It was really, really terrifying though. But what I'm saying is basically this flu does still attack the most vulnerable. So we should do our best to protect the most vulnerable. We should come together as a community and protect our elderly and the people with immune problems. However, if we're relatively healthy people, we should not freak out, but pay attention to the news to make sure we don't have to freak out. And that's my 2 bits on the coronavirus. I do not have a good segue to talk about Myhriah Young, because she talks about nothing to do with viruses. So now let's get to the part where I interview her. Do you ever wonder what it would be like to show up as your most confident, creative, and courageous version of yourself? Do you wonder if that is even possible? Myhriah Young is your gal. With a holistic approach, her signature self-system takes the years of overcoming major obstacles, experiences as a young wife and mom, and turns them into a well-timed self-love journey. She'll take you through dumping the junk, discovering you, and designing your ideal life. so that you can live a life that is more fun, fantastic, and fulfilling. Now here is my interview with Myhriah Young.
Hello, Myhriah, and welcome to my podcast.
Hey, Brett, how are you?
It is a beautiful day to be alive. How are you doing?
I love that sentiment. Yes, you're right. It is a beautiful day to be alive.
So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a wife of 20 years, which is crazy to me because it just went so fast. I also have a daughter who is 20 and a son who is 17. And then kind of figuring out this whole empty nester thing right now. We're in a transition that's very interesting. We're pretty young. We're 38, almost 39. We're getting to figure this out at a young age, which is kind of fun.
You had your kids pretty young.
We did. Part of my story.
Really? Now, that must have provided some challenges.
Yes, it did. It did.
Well, what were they?
Oh, yeah. So jump right in. I actually grew up in California areas. We lived in the desert and we actually grew up with a pretty awesome life. If I step back just a little bit, though, from my being a pregnant teenager, I would love to step back to what kind of led to that.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
We actually had a pretty great lifestyle growing up. We were able to run around, kind of do whatever we wanted because we lived on an Air Force base. So it was pretty safe and secure. And we could just like walk to the pool or go to a movie and walk. And it was pretty awesome. I don't know. I've talked to many people and a lot of them, yeah, that's not what I grew up with. How about you?
Not so much like that, but not too different. I also had very young parents.
There you go. Pretty much it was fun. We had a great time. But, when I was between the ages of 6 to 8, I had a babysitter actually who sexually molested me. And it kind of just started this path. So there was Myhriah to everybody. And then there was Myhriah in the secret. Myhriah in secret started acting out and started reenacting a lot of the stuff that she was taught from this babysitter. Obviously, that ended up looking a little crazy. Nobody really knew because on the outside, I had that mask of everything's okay. I'm still an outgoing kid. I loved doing things. I choreographed dances with my neighbors, and we had, for the most part, a pretty great time. And unfortunately, I would say I acted out all through my elementary years. Unfortunately, as we know, kids do, I did pretty textbook stuff, but it really shaped a lot of who I became in my later years.
In what ways did you act out?
Without going in too far into detail, just in this format, was touching other children. We know when children have been sexually abused, that's pretty typical. You can usually tell if a child has been sexually abused because they act out in different ways. But that's one of the telltale signs. I don't know if anybody knew that I was doing that in the background. It's hard to say. I certainly can't say my parents knew or noticed or anything like that. Yeah, it was a bit funky. And the other thing that I acted out in was that at that probably, I would say it was about kindergarten age. I always had to have a boyfriend. Now, of course, at an elementary age, that's like, you just run up to him and say, haha, you're my boyfriend, silly stuff. So at least that was innocent. But I felt like my value and worth came from that, though.
And how did that go throughout your teenage years?
So teenage years did look a bit different. When I hit mid-6th grade, we actually ended up, our base got downsized. The military was being downsized. And so our base closed. It was kind of a ghost town. It was a little bit creepy at times because we had all these empty houses everywhere. And, we'd ride by them and stuff like that. And it was just kind of weird. But right about that time was when we ended up moving, because we had to Colorado Springs. And it was a very different atmosphere for me. I went from a place where we had a lot of diversity. We had lots of different kids. And there was no racism whatsoever. It just didn't exist. It just wasn't there. None of us even knew what it meant, I don't think. At least I didn't. I can't speak for other kids, but I definitely did not experience that. Then we moved to Colorado Springs, and I was a handful of the white kids in the school. I am Caucasian, Native American mix, but my skin is more white unless I get tan in the summer. So it was a very interesting place for me coming from that environment where everybody loved each other, got along. It was like a small town. And then all of a sudden it was just crazy. Nobody liked me. Nobody knew me. Here I am with this underlying issue as well. And so I actually started to just be a liar. I just did whatever I had to do to try and fit in. Kids where I moved were having sex in middle school. That was new to me. So I started lying about that and just was very, very awkward. I look back and it's kind of sad because if I had probably thought that I needed to try to fit in, but if I had actually just been myself, the smart, intelligent, fun girl that I was, I'm pretty sure people would have liked me better. Kind of sad.
I think that's very normal. They say youth is wasted on the young, and things that's part of the reason.
It's true. I don't know too many people who get out of middle school without feeling like it was the most awkward time of their life.
Pretty much why I refused to watch the movie The Eighth Grade.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that seems like that would that could be a trigger for a lot of people.
Like a real horror movie.
Seriously. The beautiful thing is we did move again. So I'm so thankful. We moved my 8th grade year up to the Northwest. So we moved to Portland, Oregon. Kind of continued my lying habits, my trying to fit in my freshman year. I actually kind of gave myself like a makeover. So felt more confident in myself. Made friends this time. In high school, it was more, I had started to come into who I was going to be as an adult. You know, you start to kind of mature a little bit, hopefully. Not everybody does. It was very different than I had been. And I still kind of kept some of the lying, still always wanted a boyfriend and felt really depressed if I didn't because I got my value and self-worth from there. We were in Portland, Oregon for about a year. And then we moved up to Vancouver, Washington. And Vancouver, Washington was it felt more small town at the time. Again, more people knew each other. I started out with my same old habits, but I really quickly started to learn, I think these people are actually going to like me for who I am a little bit. I don't know that I consciously thought that, but it was just clear with my actions, how I started presenting myself and didn't feel like I had to lie so much. I still lied, but it was different than it had been in middle school.
So let's fast forward to when you got pregnant.
So yeah, our senior year, we coming back feeling like adults. We definitely were not doing anything to prevent getting pregnant. We were sexually active and it was a rough year because I really, really, really had no desire to be in love. And I certainly had no desire to be in love with someone from Vancouver, Washington, because to be honest, I was planning on getting away. And so to me, that was, I'm going to get stuck here. I broke up with my Alex so many times, and yet he was convenient for me, which I hate to say out loud. Ugh, I still hate saying that out loud, but it was true. You know, he would pick me up from school if I missed the bus. And so then we would end up back together that evening, like pretty much that same day. I did this so much that, yeah, when we finally did decide to get married, which was towards the end of the year, people actually had polls as to how long we would last. But about February of our senior year, we found out that we were pregnant. It's one of those things, you know, you hear people always say, oh, it couldn't happen to me. I truly, even though I wasn't preventing anything, I had myself convinced that this couldn't possibly happen to me. Yet I was certainly taking all the actions to make it happen, and I wasn't preventing anything. So we got to have the lovely conversation with my parents, and my husband swears that my dad's eyes turned red. It's not one of those things you think about like, oh, here's how this is going to go. It's going to be great. Then we got to have a conversation with his parents. They weren't as shocked. They knew we were sexually active. But I can tell you, so my family, we have had young pregnant teenagers in our family before. And I come from that family that said, okay, we're going to send you away for a bit and you're going to adopt this baby out. Like there just wasn't another option. And my husband's side, his mom actually had him at 16. She was married at really young and had him at 16. So we came from two very different backgrounds. My family immediately started going into, okay, Alex isn't allowed around anymore, and we are going to find a family for this baby. And I ended up leaving. My parents didn't know what to do. Of course they didn't know what to do. It's not an easy situation. But my mom had sent him away one day, and I said, okay, well, I'm leaving too, because this doesn't make any sense for him to not take care of me now that he is. Isn't that the thing we always worry about? If we get pregnant, don't we worry, okay, now this guy is not going to take care of me. I remember that being on Lifetime movies and things like that. Now all of a sudden I am, and you're not going to let him take care of me? That doesn't make sense. And so we ended up at his place. I can tell you, we don't really argue a whole lot, mostly because we're both pretty easygoing, but we had major screaming matches over whether or not we were going to keep our daughter or not. I will tell you, I'm so thankful that he is the stubborn, loyal, amazing man that he is, because he stood up to me, which at that point he had never done. We ended up keeping her. But I did have one stipulation, that I wanted to stay home if we were going to keep her.
So during all of that, what was because I'm looking at what you do, is there a time you felt like you lost yourself and developed a lot of negative habits, or AKA junk?
Oh, yeah. That's such a good question. Honestly, even though I said I wanted to stay at home with our kids, I didn't fully understand what that meant. And I can be honest, I wasn't even really fully ready for it. We were babies raising babies. I had no idea what I was doing. And there's plenty of things I can remember back to as a young mom that I'm so ashamed of. And I'm so thankful that kids don't remember that stuff, but especially how young. But I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the strategies. I still had this thing that's lingering in the dark side too. I dealt a lot with and talked about plenty about the sexual abuse that came out when I was in middle school. But the effects of the after the abuse, I had never dealt with. It wasn't something I thought about a lot, but I know now that I've done some self-love and gotten some help and counseling and things like that, I was basically holding myself back in every possible way. I'd try to lose weight and I couldn't. Like, I would be excited while I was in, say, like a Weight Watchers meeting I went to for a while. And the leader would get me pumped up. I'd be excited, ready to go. And then literally sometimes I would just hit the door on the way out and be like, you know what? It's not going to work. Who cares? Or there was a Safeway next door. So I'd be like, I'm just going to go get a treat or whatever. And by the time I'm leaving, I was already having negative thoughts and already sabotaging myself. And for a long time, I just couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. It truly was one day when I was sitting in a Weight Watchers meeting. I was kind of zoning out the leader, and I was kind of frustrated with myself. I was just, why can't I get ahead? Why am I having this problem? And it was at that moment I realized it was kind of one of those like surreal moments you see in movies where you kind of hear this wah, wah, wah in the background. And yet I heard this clear, almost the sky was pouring light out, and moment of, oh, I've actually been struggling with depression my whole life. So really, this weight loss thing is just a symptom of something that's way deeper and much larger than what I thought it was.
So what got you turned around into trying to live your most awesome life? It
was a journey. It definitely took some time and some work. I went from that meeting. It wasn't like I immediately was, oh, I know what to do. I can tend to be that way, actually. It's kind of my personality. I always think I just get it figured out and just go. I did that for a little bit and it still wasn't working. So I let it go for a good, I would say probably a good 6 months to a year. Somewhere in there was actually when Robin Williams' story came out. It really hit me like a ton of bricks. I heard the story about how he was so outgoing, and in front of friends, he was laughing and he was funny and all of that stuff. Like, we know him. But then in the background, when he would get home, he was negative and depressed and a totally different person. It just hit me like, oh my gosh, that's me. And I never considered myself to be that. Of course, he had taken his life at that point. I realized I had been having suicidal thoughts. That was when I finally was, okay, this is not who I am. This is not me. And so I finally went and I told my husband what was happening. Of course, he immediately was like, okay, we are taking you to the doctor today. We are not waiting on this. I just remember sitting in that doctor's office and them asking me pretty typical questions that they ask for depression and just weeping because I couldn't believe that I had to answer yes to the question, were you having suicidal thoughts? Those kinds of they're like standard questions. I had to say yes. And I just couldn't believe that that was me.
So what got you to the point of turning it around? What did you do?
So I definitely got some help. I got counseling. I actually went to my pastor and let him know what was going on. I started talking, and the craziest thing that I did, I wouldn't even say it's crazy, but I would say it was so impactful to me. I actually decided to just reach out on Facebook. I decided I'm not going to hide this anymore. I'm not going to continue to just let everyone think that everything's hunky-dory. So I just reached out and I said, hey, listen, I just need you guys to know this is what I've been struggling with. I need you to hear this. And I just kind of told my story. And it was just amazing to me how many people reached out and were, yes, thank you for sharing. I've been struggling with this too. I mean, it was just such an outpouring of love and support and just amazing stuff. I would say that was the start and the catalyst of what got me turning around. Just knowing like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. But what also hit me was I'm not alone and others are feeling this way. What can we do to work on this? I didn't start solving it. I let myself just be in it and really work on me. From there, I just kind of started a self-love journey, and I've actually from it ended up with this system that's what I teach now. But it wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. I wanted it to be. I just wanted it to be like, okay, I figured it out and I'm all done. I got it. Now I'm going to teach you how to do it. But it wasn't like that. And if I was to say that I didn't still struggle with this from time to time, I'd be lying. It still pops up every now and then.
What got you to the point of wanting to, as you became happier and happier and joyful and developing your system, what made you want to make this a career, something you can help others with?
So I will say, I've always been entrepreneurial. I can't even help myself. Like sometimes people will talk to me and I'm an ideation person in the Strength Finders. I don't know if you've ever done that. I have so many ideas. Anytime I thought, okay, I'm going to help people with their depression and we're going to work on that. And that's what my niche is going to be. Well, I learned pretty quickly that having that be your niche is kind of depressing. Go figure. Yeah. I actually was like, okay, maybe I'm not meant to be the one that directly works with people with depression, but it was a good thing because what it helped me to see is what I'm not. I'm not a counselor. And it also helped me to understand when it is important to send someone to go get help. So that was good. I feel like I've had these pivots within my entrepreneurial journey where it's like, oh, I think I'm doing this now, but then now I'm doing this and now I'm doing this. Each time though, I learned something new about myself, something new about what I wanted to do or didn't want to do. So that was really neat. Now I would say that the women that I tend to work with have actually, I don't want to say they've necessarily been through the work. In fact, sometimes they haven't been through the work and might not realize that they need to do some work. So that's okay. I can usually help them to see, hey, this is really affecting you. You're shaking as you're telling me this story. I think it might be, I say it in a very loving way, but I help them to see it really could be really helpful for you to go and get some counseling. And I'm just not a counselor. I don't have the training. There's a reason that they are certified in what they do. But the women that I tend to work with usually have some life experience and they do have that thing like what I had that's holding them back. Maybe it's just self-doubt because of something a parent said, or maybe it's the way their family handled confrontation or whatever that is. So we start with what I call dump the junk. And that actually goes through those exhaustive behaviors that we all have, like the shoulds. You should be doing this way. I mean, I feel like there's so many shoulds out there right now. You should be eating organic and you should be doing this and you should be doing that. There's the people pleasing, there's comparing and judging. There's all these things that we tend to have that are just exhausting. I don't know about you, but they wear me out just thinking about it.
Oh, definitely.
And then what we do is we actually take the next step, which is what I call discover the real you. And we take personality assessments, we take your story, we take other pieces, and we start to really allow each woman to, and I mostly work with women, but men can do this too. Men can totally do this, but you start to really give yourself permission to be that person that you always are. For me, I had really suppressed my little girl. She was outgoing, likes to dance, likes to try new things, likes adventure, but I had 100% squashed that. Like what you were saying, was there a time when you kind of lost yourself? I had completely lost myself.
So with the people that you've worked with, what has been one of your favorite success stories?
I actually have a lady who, she was in a rut. She's a wonderful, I would say, I think she's like 50s gal. She'd actually had quite a few accomplishments in her life. You know, if she really had thought through it, she would call herself a successful woman. Yet she had found herself in this just rut. She wasn't feeling successful. She'd had a bad relationship, just not in a great place. Even stuck where she was living. She just wasn't loving all of that. And so we started the process, and really just some of the biggest things that I remember was when we were just started looking at the life wheel. I don't know, are you familiar with Zig Ziglar's life wheel?
Yeah, I've worked with the life wheel.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. I have one that I've kind of created a little bit differently because, you know, I like looking at roles that we play too. So we started looking at this, and it was amazing to me, and to her even, from week to week, what we would work on in these little pieces. You know, we'd only pick 3 a week for her to work on, and we'd only do one task in each of those. But each week she was coming back and she was just motivated and excited, and she was having these new ideas of what she could do and was reaching out to people. She had been isolated before, and now she was reaching out to people. She wasn't going and having any recreational fun, and now she was going out and dancing and got back into working out. And it was just amazing how these tiny steps that I'm sure you may feel this way too as a coach, these steps that we forget are kind of almost, I don't want to say duh, and it's not that, but it's like almost second nature. Like, okay, this isn't working, so I need to work in this. And she even knew some of that. Just to have someone like walking through, don't really want to say holding her hand, but supporting this movement and the accountability that went with that. She just made leaps and bounds. So by the time we were done, she went from being in a rut, really was feeling isolated, wasn't really doing anything, to she was then starting a blog, and she was going to start volunteering, and she started a business, and she did all this cool stuff. And so it's just really neat to see someone who I even knew before we started. I was like, you have so much potential. And I really believe that about everyone. I believe everyone has potential. But to see that come out so vividly was so cool.
That is so cool. So We are coming to the end of our time together, and one thing I like to ask my guests is to do a 1 minute of motivation. You can imagine this as if you are in a time machine and you're going back to your 8-year-old self, and you want to tell yourself what you need to succeed in life, but unfortunately you only have a minute before you're taken back into the future. Or you can think of it as condensing your entire life message into a minute.
Awesome. I would say you are a diamond. You have a great purpose, and everyone that meets you is going to be blessed by you. These silly moments that you have right now, it's okay. You're going to make it through. It's going to make you stronger and more amazing. You're going to make it through. This too shall pass.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on my podcast. I really enjoyed listening to your story of how you kind of lost yourself throughout your entire life by different means, and then discovering and working toward yourself and rediscovering who you are, and now helping others to do the same, which is extremely empowering. And so thank you for coming onto my podcast, and thank you for everything you do for this world.
Thank you so much too, Brett. I appreciate your time.
May your day be special.
You too.
There you have it, folks. That is my interview with Myhriah Young. Wow, you could see what she's gone through in her life. Childhood trauma is something that does affect us all. I know it affected me as well. Not as bad as Myhriah. Yeah, I was never molested as a kid. Even though I did know my dad dated a woman once, and her child was molested by her best friend. This child cried every time his mom left the room, which included going to the bathroom. The guy had my name too, Brett, and I liked him. But luckily, my dad never left me alone with him, even when he said he'd babysit Tasha and I, and we both liked it because he was a nice guy, and Dad said nah, because just he had a bad feeling in his gut. So thank you, Dad, for listening to that feeling in your gut. But to go through depression and to get out of it, another person talks about getting help and therapy. Noticing a trend, if you listen to all my podcasts, the benefits of getting help and seeking help. And it can be hard. And luckily, her husband was a type of person who believed in therapy and believed in getting her help once she came out with it. It's very important to seek help. We are not alone. When it comes to your problems, you are not special. There is somebody out there who has gone through or is going through what you are going through. And there's somebody out there who is trained to help you. And so do what you can to get and seek that help. There's programs to help you pay for it if you are having problems with money. But your mindset is one of the most important things in the world, especially your emotional health. And just so seeking help. And then once you seek that help, if you want to take your life to the next level and truly thrive, that's when you hire someone like Myhriah. Have you ever felt like you show up to a different life situations as a different person? In one place, you're bold, confident, respected, yet in another, you feel meek, afraid, and unworthy. Myhriah's free printable signature self-consultation will help you control your greatness so you can feel boldly and confidently you wherever you go. Also, she's giving you 6 all-time favorite personal assessments so you can begin your journey to knowing yourself to a completely different level. And not only that, she also has a free online module of her signature self system called Discovering the Real You workbook and pages to teach you to help you bring things together and help you begin the work necessary to love yourself even more. So check her out at MyhriahYoung.com. And in the doobly-doo, or the show notes, I will put in a special offer that she has just for this audience, which is you, because you listen to my 60th podcast. Woohoo! Awesome possum. Thank you so much for being a listener. I am proud of you for making it this far, and I love you for it. If you want to email me for any reason, you can email me at BRE2Ts, at joyousexpansion.com. I also have a free gift for you at joyousexpansion.com. You can also check out all my podcasts at pod.joyousexpansion.com. If you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, leave a review, whatever it takes to help me share it. To help other people. Yeah, because that's what you do when you share something you like. You can find me at Joyous Expansion on Twitter, Joyous Expansion on LinkedIn, Joyous Expansion on Instagram, and Increase Your Joy on Facebook. That is some bad SEO, but what are you going to do? I am Brett Dupree, your champion of authentic joy, Joyous Expansion, life coach, and catalyst transformation of the Church of Awesome. Wishing you, once again, to be loved, to be joy, to be awesome. Now play my jingle.
JoyousExpansion.com. JoyousExpansion.com. Come and say hello to Brett Dupree. He is an inspirational life coach. Good for you and good for me. He turned my life from grey to blue. I'm sure he'll do the same for you. Get in touch and you'll see your life will change dramatically. JoyousExpansion.com. JoyousExpansion.com. Yeah.